Welcome, everyone, into Garden of Thought, hosted by the Sports Jedi Network. Thank you very much to our guest this episode, Raymond E. Foster. Before we get into there's our producer. Hi, Sports Jedi Kev. So, folks, a couple things. Obviously, I got in before Sports Jedi Kev, and he just got in right. I think I jumped the gun by 15 seconds because I wanted to get the thing started. We have the wrong art behind us. As you see, this is not the MLW files. This is, in fact, the Garden of Thought. And you did see the beginning of the MLW files intro for a fraction of a second before I clicked it onto the correct intro. So I think Kevin is throwing me into the deep side of the pool on purpose to see what I can do on my own, can't do on my own, teaching me to be more independent. Last note. I know this week you have gotten 3 shows in quick succession. That is not our usual MO here. It's because now we're live, and I was not used to doing live shows, and I often had 3 or 4 shows in the tank for the eventual guest postponements, cancellations, no shows, or if there's the show art, or if I needed a week off or something. But with live, you don't really have that luxury, and you don't do it. So that's why you got 3 shows within like 5 days or 4 days. That will not happen going forward. It'll be more like your 3 shows or 4 shows every 2 weeks kind of thing. Anyway, Raymond Foster, thank you for your patience. Raymond Foster is a retired detective from the New York City Police Department. He was also in the Coast Guard, and somewhere along the line he started a journey into, well, all the things we like: arcana, esoterica, mythology, philosophies, searching for things. But who better to tell us about the man himself than the man himself? Welcome, Raymond Foster.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. So tell us a little bit about your biography.
Well, in 1975, I enlisted in the United States Coast Guard. In fact, this week I went to boot camp in '76. So this would be 50 years ago. I was in my second week of boot camp during this time, and so that was a very long time ago. And I tell people that I joined at the time. It was the end of the Vietnam War just ended. In fact, the draft had just ended, and the Coast Guard had the word life-saving service. That's what it was. It was a life-saving service. In 1980, I joined the Los Angeles Police Department, and our motto is to protect and to serve. And then in 2025, after I retired from the police department, I became a Rotarian first, and their motto is service above self. So I think for 50 years, I've got this probably public service gene in me. That's what I do. About my first glimpse at Freemasonry occurred when I was about 14 or 15 years old. I met a man who would become my future father-in-law. I would find out that he was a Mason, but he was the one who introduced me first to Dianetics, which was very popular at the time, and then all the way through Aristotle, Plato, and ultimately Carlos Castaneda's and some very, very strange things with shamans and shamanism. And so that set me on a path for my entire life, even through my college education of pursuing things and trying to find out like ancient traditions. And ultimately I would become a Freemason and then begin to explore how that ritual embodies, well, thousands of years of thought on the journey of a human being for self-development through really symbols and lessons that those before us have learned. So there you go. That's how I get to where I am today. And I end up writing a couple of books, but this is the last book I wrote.
Well, thank you for that. And sorry for saying New York. See, Kevin and I are both native New Yorkers, and we both live in other places. So I sort of had New York on the brain. And the last retired police officer I remember was the retired chief of detectives, Joseph Varelli. So I was hoping to play a little do you know, but that's 3,000 miles away. So the answer is almost certainly no, unless you were paying very close attention to the Son of Sam documentaries, because he was the lead detective on that case. And in any event, you were there during OJ then in LA.
Well, as a matter of fact, I happened to be in internal affairs at the time, and I end up investigating the 14 hours of tapes that Mark Furman had talked about, and the whole Furman controversy.
Sure.
He's
Recently
the
deceased.
that found the bloody. He did. He just passed away, and so I spent probably 6 months of my career investigating most, if not all, of the issues of misconduct that came out, or the allegations of misconduct that came out of that trial. And at the time, it was interesting, but it got boring pretty fast. But yeah, I was involved in that.
Yeah, that's probably a whole nother show. But I'm going to ask another question that's unrelated to our topic. What during your service in the Coast Guard, did you
Uh-huh.
do any work in international waters or international territories?
Well, no, I didn't. My first year I spent as a deckhand on an 82-footer out of Marina del Rey, and the search and rescue stuff, we probably didn't go any further than San Nicolas Island. So probably, 20, 25 miles off the coast, which technically would be international waters, but not really, no. And then they sent me to radioman school, where they taught me the valuable skill of Morse code. And I was a radio operator assigned to the Long Beach radio station, which was at the Palos Verdes lighthouse. So no, I didn't. The Coast Guard has missions all around the world,
Right.
and they work with the Coast Guards everywhere. In fact, when I was in boot camp, about the 8th, maybe 9th week, you go in and you begin to look at your specialty. What do you want to become? And I scored high enough on the test, the ABSFAB, I could do anything. And I had really three major choices. One was boatswain's mate, which is you learn to drive the boats more or less, and you learn to take care of them. Coxswain, which is you drive the boats, or radio operator. Well, and the coxswain thing, they showed us World War II movies, because the Coast Guards, those are the guys that drove the landing craft up on the beach. And I watched that movie. I'm like, no, that looks like a one-way job. I don't want that job. So that's why I deselected that and became a radio operator. So no, I never went overseas.
Okay. The reason I ask is, one, I'm very interested in how international law works in international law enforcement. But one of the reasons is, aside from it being independently interesting, is that I have done a series. I'm actually sort of proud of it, but it's not in a row. It's been during the course of the show under the now defunct title Garden Views, which was the complementary title to Garden of Doom. They've all been subsumed into Garden of Thought. And it was on the laws of space. So I started with what are the laws of space, then I got into what will the laws of space be, or what might they be. And so I talked to a retired general who ran the international wing of Dulles for 14 years. I talked to immigration attorneys. I talked to people who work with the Jones Act and the Longshoreman Act and maritime law and aviation law, air traffic controllers, both civil and military, and all sorts of things like that. And what I can't find is, I even have an entire show of, so you want to launch a satellite, here's how you do it. And plenty of lawyers and journalists and and scientists and things like that, as well as to how you would do that, and how far we are away. But I can't find international law enforcement, which I figure would act prominently within it, except for a small sample of how law enforcement acted within the international wing of the airport in Washington, D.C., and it was frighteningly casual, or not as formal as I would have thought. Anyway, this show's topic is none of those things. This show's topic is symbology, which, when you wrote your pitch, you said, my work is sort of at the intersection of philosophy, mythology, religion, and a whole bunch of things. I'm like, so is mine. So yeah, so tell us a little bit about that story. I mean, I thought I heard Freemasonry in there somewhere, but again, it could have been something I imagined in my head. So, let's pass the baton to you and take us to, what got you into these types of investigations, which turned into studies, which turned into, sort of like a passion.
So I've written 9 books. When I retired from the police department, my first textbook came out. And so I've been writing over the last couple of decades and teaching and consulting. And I also became a Freemason about 19 years ago, a little over 19 years ago. And as I began to went through the degrees, passed through the chairs, became the master of a lodge, I began to ask a lot of questions about the ritual. What was the meaning of the ritual? We teach, there's a term, the term goes back 150, 200 years called a parrot mason. That's a guy who can give it all back to you 100%, but he doesn't know what it means. And so I was interested in what it meant. And so I began to explore it, and the best way to learn something is to develop a way to teach it, right? And so I began by giving Masonic education in my own lodge. My first foray into that was a miserable failure because I started too esoteric. And so I dialed that back, and much of the ritual that we use in Freemasonry today comes from the King James Version of the Bible. So I began the journey there. I reframed the lessons, and I explored the surface level of the symbols and began to peel away what the symbology might mean on a deeper level and present to people. Ultimately, I conducted a graduate seminar at another lodge over a year's period on the 3 degrees. About 30 men would get together. I would pose a question and we would discuss it. Well, this led to outlines led to essays led to a book, and that's where the Temple Within comes from. So I wrote the Temple Within, and when I finished it, it's about 96,000 words. And I looked at it. I didn't know what to call it. It just sat there. In fact, it sat there for 6 months while I just racked my brain for what was the title of this thing. So I finished another book, and that book taught me the temple. It gave me the Temple Within. It taught me what this one would be. And so that really is. This is partially, I'm not going to say it's a memoir, but it's an examination of Freemasonry from the lens that I viewed it through as I journeyed along my path.
Okay, so obviously people are familiar with Freemasonry, or at least the myths of Freemasonry, whether you read the Da Vinci Code or National Treasure and those movies, and La Infante and all the founders and Sacred Geometry and things like that. People who have followed this show for a long time know that we've spoken to a bunch of Masons and probably to the interests of the sports Jedi universe. Some of those include formerly known as Damian Sandow, Aaron Stevens Haddad, pro wrestler still with NWA. My former co-host, PJ Black from the Book of Black, of course, former FKA, Justin Gabriel with WWE, and several other of the wrestlers have been Masons as well. One thing I've learned is that Masons, like everybody else in every other religion, they're not all the same. There may be the same rituals and dogma and whatnot, but they're not all the same. But I'm going to have you start at the top because I don't know how old Vedic Indian culture is, and I don't know that anybody actually knows. But in their scripture or holy books or Rig Veda, there's 33 million gods. And 33 million, that's a lot. Nobody categorized 33 million gods. The 33rd level is that highest level of the Mesa. And I do not believe that it's a coincidence that 33 from as far back as, let's just say 4,000 years ago in Vedic, for all I know, it was 8,000 years ago, 3,500, whatever. And it's the 33rd level. I know in the mythos or the factos or historicity of Christ died at age 33. A lot of myths or beliefs about the 33rd parallel. What is the symbology of the 33rd level? And please don't tell me, well, the 32nd was really hard, but 33rd, that's just when we stopped. There was nothing left.
Well, actually, the 33rd degree is an honorary degree given to somebody for their service to the craft. So, and it's also, that's a Scottish Rite degree. That's not so Masonry, every Mason is a Blue Lodge Mason. They take the first three degrees. They are a Master Mason. They take the Entered Apprentice, the Fellowcraft, and Master Mason. And then you make a decision about joining either appendant or concordant bodies. And there are two broad sections. One is Scottish Rite, and the other is York Rite. I'm a York Rite Mason. The primary difference is that, and the Scottish Rite, by the way, doesn't come from Scotland. It comes from France, and that's a great story in and of itself. But the York Rite, or as we say, really more the American Rite, is a Christian-centric degrees and look at Freemasonry, whereas Scottish Rite tends to be a non-secular or a secular degrees and not really dialed into any religion. And that's really the only the primary difference between the two. And also that the purpose of men in the Scottish Rite in these upper degrees was to attempt to provide more instruction about what happened in the first three degrees. Everything you need to know happens in the first 3 degrees, but somewhere along the line, guys said, well, nobody understood this, so let's try to explain it again. Or nobody was peeling apart the different parts of this, so let's explain it again. And so the 33rd degree is a symbolic degree it's an award, really, you've done for service. That goes in the Scottish Rite, goes to 32nd degree. The York Rite goes only to 15, but the important is the first 3. And I talk a little bit in the book. I talk about the number 3 and the magic number 3 because that appears everywhere. There's the 3 degrees of Masonry. 33 is 11 times 3. 3 is twice. The Trinity. Here's the thing. There's a couple things you can say about it. Our thought process is primarily not Latin. It's from the Greek, and the Greek thought is in 3 pieces. There's the logos, there's the ethos, and there's the philos. So there's the 3 types of thought that are in everything that we do. And so it may well be that the reason we see 3 is that. The second is that the first number that is a pattern is 3. I mean, 1 is by itself. 1 is the beginning of all journeys. 1 is the beginning of all matter. This goes back to there's many ancient initiatic orders that begin with the number 1. Number 2 is 2 of 1. One is male, 2 is female, and because 2 can be divided, right? But 3 is the first one you get a pattern in. So 3 is the first pattern. 3 is the 3 parts of speech. So that may well be why we recognize 3 more often than not, rather than there's some magic to 3 beyond that.
Okay, so this is one. So maybe we should do I don't know if you want to go through the symbols that are valid and talk about those, or if you want to play a bunk debunk game. I want to play the bunk debunk game.
Well, you've got all these symbols that you've got here in your, and I can see on this page, the 2 that I can see, you've got the square and compass with the letter G in the center, and you've also got a sword under that, which indicates to me that you're probably some kind of the nobles of the mystic shrine or a shriner. Then you've got Horus, you've got the all-seeing eye. The all-seeing eye is very important to Freemasonry. It teaches us quite a few lessons. It's also important to ancient Egyptian mythology as well as religion, but for a Freemason, the all-seeing eye is not necessary. The simple lesson on that is God is watching you, right? He sees everything that you do. There you go. And well, look at all the symbols you've got there. You've got the tree, and by the way, the tree. What you see in that tree is exactly what Freemasonry is. That is a depiction of Freemasonry, and it explains everything there is about it. Yeah, but not the way that you see this, because you're seeing the tree of life there, but there's something else going on, and I'll tell you what it is. Freemasonry, if you were to just look at the history of architecture, you could find stonemasons all the way back to before the building. What is it, Göbekli Tepe? They were working with stone back then. Stonemasons have been around a very long time, and we have a good written history of them through the Collegia with the Roman Empire. At the time of the Roman Empire actually exists when Solomon's Temple is still around. It exists when the
second temple,
the seagoing. Yes, no, the first temple. The Roman Empire is founded. Rome is founded with the kings about 200 years into the first temple still being around. And at that time, not the Pharisees. What's the ones who travel around? I'll think of the word. There's another traveling culture that's in that time. No, I'll think of it. My head will pull it out. But so they had cross communication, right? There's no question they had cross communication. They weren't that far apart, and they were in the same time, generally speaking. So they were all there. So there's this history of architecture and a history of stonework. That's the tree, right? That's the tree of Freemasonry, that history. Ancient stonemasons didn't sit around and think of symbols. But what happens early on the Age of Enlightenment, there's all kinds of clubs that are coming up, and these clubs are melding into the ancient guilds. And these clubs, the Rosicrucians, the different clubs, merge into what we call speculative masonry around the beginning of 1620, 1630, 1640s, the earliest we know of. So all the different philosophies are like a vine. If you pull that picture back, what you see is very different vines, and these vines are growing into the tree of life. The tree is the history of stonemasons. The vines are all of the vines of the different philosophies. They're going to grow into the tree, and the two things are, by the time it gets to us, they're indistinguishable. But if you go to Freemasonry and you pull one of these vines, you're going to find Socrates, you're going to find Buddha, you're going to find Jesus Christ. You're going to find them all down through these vines. That's the strength of the stoneworking, and then it's been absorbed with the philosophy. That's really what that symbol's teaching us. And then you've got all the other symbols around it. We could talk about any of them that you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that using the show art, because I mean, somebody prepared that for me based a little bit on show art that I approved before. Obviously symbology and symbols and things like that are things that I wanted in there, but I didn't, I just love the way it came out. I mean, there's also a UFO in the corner as well. So
sure, but think about this. But think about what I just said. Remember, now I'm looking down at the base, and intuitively, by the way, we bring archetypes out. We bring this stuff out because we all intuitively know it. But whoever drew this, what they put at the bottom, it looks like Stonehenge. They put ancient stone building at the base of the tree. The tree is growing out of that. That's the history of architecture and all of mankind doing all our stuff. And then the philosophies are all getting mixed in and then becoming indistinguishable from the tree itself. And so our job is
on purpose. He was a pretty deep fellow who did that.
No, there you go. He might have done it on purpose, or he might have intuitively knew it, and that's what you end up with. That's my interpretation.
There's also a pyramid there over the, beyond the tree, and of course there's a dragon in the tree. I don't know if it's supposed to be the actual dragon that runs up and down Yggdrasil or not. Looks like we got Zeus there, though. It could be Marduk or Indra. So, bunker debunk. Is there a right-hand path and a left-hand path in Masonry?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess that's the answer. Is it? No. I heard the right-hand path is the path of righteousness. The left-hand path is sort of the path of wrongness. Some people go as far as Lucifer, Satan, whatever, evil. But left hand is wrong, right hand is right. Sort of going back to like the king's right-hand man, the trusted advisors on the right. Of course, on the left would be the queen. So demonize the woman, I suppose. It sounds like it's not part of it, but if based on what I said, is there anything more to it?
Well, if you get human beings involved in anything, it'll go sideways, right? So you have people involved in Freemasonry, and have they abused Freemasonry? Of course they have. There's been scandals within Freemasonry, and there have been men who have used it to their own ends. That's absolute. There's no argument there. And if you were to take the lessons that you can learn in Freemasonry and you were to use them selfishly, then you could choose whether that's left or right. I tend not to divide the world up so easily in good and evil, right and wrong, bad and good. But you could use everything any tool. You could take a hammer and build a house, or you could knock somebody's brains out. So yeah, things can be used incorrectly. I think for the most part, I didn't write this, Albert Pike did, but most Masons are ignorant of the power of their craft, and they don't use it. And those that do probably use it for good, I would imagine. It only has one use, and that's making you better. I don't know how it can be good or bad.
What about all the symbols on currency, on the dollar, and the architecture and the layout of Washington, D.C.? Is there anything Freemason about that, or is that just like a myth that's sort of taken on a life of its own?
Well, I think that the dollar bill, there was a committee put together for the original symbols, and Benjamin Franklin was on that. And he was the Grand Master of Masons in Philadelphia, and the motto, from one out of many one, and then the pyramid on the back, and you've got the incomplete pyramid, which is talking about the incomplete state of man or the incomplete building state of the country. and of course the divine providence, or the all-seeing eye of divine providence. So all of those, to say they're Masonic symbols, these are ancient symbols. Some of these are alchemical. There you go. You can see the all-seeing eye, the incomplete pyramid. There are
Well, I
13
mean, a
arrows.
lot of the
Those are the
secret
13.
societies sort of have common threads through them, and sometimes it's hard to tell where one ends and one begins. But yeah, so
Sure.
that eye is not a menacing, we can see all, we're observing you and you must obey kind of eye. It's a kindly eye, just reminding you that the God is watching.
Yeah, and see, that's the secret they're going to tell you, but that's not the most powerful thing of it, right? And you can say that Horus, Horus is the eye and the all-seeing eye. Here's the thing, man. Whatever you're looking at, here's the secret to that. There's twofold. The first is whatever you're paying attention to, that's what you're going to get. Whatever you're watching, whatever you're looking at, that's what you're going to see. Number one. And number two is the only one that's watching you constantly is your own internal clock, your own consciousness, your own conscience. That's what's watching you and should be governing you all the time. You shouldn't need an external God in the sky to keep you from doing stupid stuff. You should have that internal. Those are the deeper lessons of Freemasonry that, I think that those are the things that a man should contemplate, right? What am I paying attention to, and am I regulating my own conduct? Am I in charge of my own house? That's the secret. And you can believe God's watching you. That's a great thing to believe, but I don't know that should regulate your behavior.
Well, Horus isn't the only god that lost an eye. I mean, Odin comes to mind. I mean, that's clearly the eye of Horus on my art, and it's most likely the eye of Horus because it's a pyramid, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. But there's all-seeing eyes and lots of Argus with 100 eyes or whatever it is, and the wheels of Ezekiel with the eyes upon eyes upon eyes on that. So there's eyes all over the place. So what are myths that you would like to debunk about Freemasonry, if any, and the Freemasons? And if so, why?
Well, if I could build myths up, I think that'd be great. I think the more mysterious you are, the more people want to pay attention.
Okay, let's do that.
From a selfish point of view, make it more secret and scary. Here's the thing. First off, this is attributed to Benjamin Franklin. I've never found a place where he wrote it, but it's attributed to him. And what he said was the biggest secret about Freemasonry: there are no secrets. The only thing that we don't share, and we should never share, are modes of recognition. That's our secret handshakes and passwords. And we should probably be careful about the ritual and sharing the exact parts of our ritual and how it goes. That's one of the challenges of writing the book was exploring Freemasonry without violating that obligation. And so the decision I made was, if a scholar had written about a certain symbol in some other method, the cat was already out of the bag, and therefore it was okay for me to further explore that symbol in some other way. There are times in the book where I will tell people, I'm going to talk about the Book of Ruth here and why it's so important and what the lessons are, but I'm not going to tell you why in Freemasonry we talk about the Book of Ruth. That gives away the show unnecessarily. So I think that's the biggest thing. There are no secrets to our symbols. The secret is that you're not going to use them anyway, so we might as well just tell you what they are. It's very difficult to employ all this stuff.
Now, Ruth, was she the ugly sister, or was that Leah or Rachel?
No, Ruth was she was the daughter-in-law of Naomi, and that's the one who marries the guy. They go to a faraway land, and the husband and the two brothers die, leaving the three widows, and they come back to into Israel. That's that beautiful poem, "Whither thou goest, I goest also." That comes out of there. You probably heard it at a wedding or something, and so that story in itself teaches quite a bit. But at the end, there's a reveal that Masons, once you tell that story and you give the reveal at the end, the Masons go, "Oh, wait a minute, what does that mean?" And it points to it. It has to do with the two columns that we have in the lodge. Those two columns that you'll see that we named Boaz and Jachin. and why they're important and what they teach us and why we use them and employ them in our ritual.
But you're
And
really
so
going Old Testament with Boaz and
well, that's part of our, again, if you look at American Freemasonry, we come out of the United Grand Lodge of England. At the time that the ritual was worked up as we have it today, would have been around between 1720 and 1733. And the men who worked on it, probably that's when it's written down, but the earlier visions are coming around 1630, 1640. And the same men who worked on the King James version of the Bible probably worked on the ritual. There are some connections to the Rosicrucian Society. And
King
so the
James
fact that
didn't do it by himself.
No, no, he didn't do that.
Oh my goodness! Well, there's a myth busted right there.
That was a political move on his part.
Did he write the demonology book at least on his own?
I don't know if he did that or not. He may have contributed. If you read the King James version of the Bible, it's not meant to be read; it's meant to be spoken. And so, if you learn to speak it, and we don't speak that way any longer, it's very poetic. And so, I like we draw great passages from Job, and I like Job. That's one of my favorite books of the Bible. I mean, God's having a staff meeting in the beginning, and there's sea monsters and there's all kinds of stuff in that book. I'm like, oh, this is really cool.
Well,
so
sea monsters.
We draw a lot from that. Yes, yeah. There were sea monsters in that.
Yes, and there still are. Look at any map. Prove me wrong. Poor Job. Well, until he was rich Job, but still, he earned his kibbles and bits. That's for sure. That fella. I just recently did a show about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I posited to my guest, is Charlie Job. So, so you could thinking about that one for a while. In any event, a book, not movie. What other symbols should we know about that are actually part of Masonry? Because there's, and of course, do you and other, well, I have been corrected many times that the Freemasons are not a secret society. We are a public society. We put our mark right on the buildings. We're a society with secrets, but not secret societies. But do you and other societies with secrets, or perhaps secret societies, have like scavenger hunts and color wars and card games and other contests, to see whose esoteric and alchemist skills are better?
No, you're going to find most lodge meetings are pretty boring, and that's
so like
part
no
of the
Moses, no
problem.
staves turning into snakes or anything.
No, we don't. There's not much. Well, there's not much magic in that respect. There is magic going on. The men don't see the magic, and there's psychological reasons that the magic works. But I think that you'd find most of Freemasonry is pretty boring from looking from the inside out or even from the outside in. But there's reasons that things are secret. There's a tradition of this secrecy. And you got to remember, this secrecy goes back, 400 or 500 years. When the first ritual was written down, right, in the early part of the 18th century, it's only 75 years since they were burning people to stake for thinking a different way. And it was not just that they were doing that, but that there was state policy. That was state policy. You're Catholic, we're going to burn you at the stake. And it was in the wars, the religious wars that went on on Europe, where we just destroyed entire libraries and knocked over churches because you believe differently. And so to keep your different belief secret and to meet in a place where you could begin to discuss the world around you in a certain nature only makes sense, right? You don't want to get murdered because you believe something different. So that's one of the reasons that secrecy becomes important to Freemasonry early on. The second reason is that Freemasonry looked at it and said, look, we've seen this. We saw the great libraries in Alexandria burned down. We saw Northern Europe where some of the monasteries were burned and books were burned. We've seen this today. We see people banning and burning books everywhere. People like to suppress knowledge. So what the idea in Freemasonry is, if we didn't write it down and we said it mouth to ear so that you heard it and you memorized it and you passed it on to the next guy, the knowledge was not as easily destroyed, and it was better inculcated in the human being. The third reason for secrecy is some of the information It's like all self-development information. If you just did one part of it, it could be harmful to you, right? You have to, it's taught by degrees. You have to begin at the beginning and you have to go through the whole process. And so keeping it secret was a safe. So there's a safety aspect. So there are reasons that masonry historically has been kept secret. And I think these are strong reasons to do so, to continue to do so today. We shouldn't write it down because we're still trying to destroy knowledge. Human beings are like that. I don't like what you said, so I'm going to burn your book. I'm going to cancel you. I'm going to delete you. So yeah, maybe we need to keep a secret or two.
Okay, but I mean, also the other side is that that is a reason to write it down. So if I'm correct, there's no women Freemasons. Is that right?
That's in the Freemasonry that I observe. There are no women in the Freemasonry. There is co-masonry in Europe and in some of the United States. There are female Masonic organizations here in California. Even there are Masonic appendant bodies that are like Job's Daughters or Eastern Star that are for women that we associate with. But in the Blue Lodge that I attend, there are no women.
And that's most of the lodges, correct?
Sure, I suppose so. I've never, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm just asking, but that's why I mean. And listen, believe me, I grew up on the Little Rascals. I He-Man, Woman Haters Club, boys rule, girls drool. I get it, but is there any reason why it's a men's only order at least in the Blue Lodges?
I take a lot of flack for this, man. From my wife and my three daughters. I have five children. Three of them are daughters, and my oldest daughter is 47 years old. I got a granddaughter that's in her mid-20s, and they will say that to me.
Yeah, but they
We'll
should
have this
understand you should
discussion.
have at least one space for yourself.
So here's the thing. I believe that in the future, that rule will probably go away. But that is one of those transitions that will take a long time. But maybe it shouldn't go away. I'm not certain. I'm betwixt and between on this for two reasons. Number one is all of the violence in our society is perpetrated by men, 100%. I mean, 98%, all the violence is men, all the major crime. There needs to be a space where we teach men to be good men. We need to do that. We have a whole lost generation of young men. Number two is for women, there is a rite of passage. For men, there is not. Masonry provides a rite of passage. For women, if you have a daughter, there's going to be a day when she begins to menstruate and the house is in an uproar as she is told all the secrets of life and her life changes because she's become a young woman. You can be a young man and not know the secrets of life and hit the mid-20s and not know what's going on. We
Or
don't
the
have those
mid-50s.
same passages. Huh?
Or the
It's true,
mid-50s.
man. Yeah, you could go a long time, and if you know, and never figure it out. So I think for those reasons, having a space, and I'll tell this also, if there's a women's club here in town, and there's also a Seroptimus group, and I talk to them all the time because of the Rotary and the Chamber. We work with them, and they'll agree with you. You know what? If you're the women's club and you're meeting, and you put a man in the room, the dynamics change. If you're a men's club and you're meeting, you put a woman in the room, the dynamics change. And that's just the human nature. That's hard to fight. So I think there's good reasons. And I'm going to maintain that it's more positive than it is negative.
Is the root of it something like, the priests were only men and, faiths?
Well, I don't know what the root of it is. I mean,
Okay.
I think if you go back, we've had a patriarchal society for as long as is our current written history of about 4,000 years is a patriarchal society, period. I
Yeah,
mean,
pretty much.
and remember, my grandfather was voting when his wife couldn't vote. Okay, and that is 2 generations away. I knew that man very well. I was 15 or 16 when he passed away, and his wife couldn't vote when he could vote. He's a World War I doughboy. I mean, you think about the transition of society has been pretty slow and pretty damn recent.
Yeah, no,
So
this is all true. Um, Connections to other groups that are older. Um, that's my understanding. Are there any real connections to like the Rosicrucians or the Templars, or is that the stuff of myth making?
well, it's interesting though. The Rosicrucians. This is a harder one to answer academically. You got to separate this out, by the way. The mythology, the academics of it, and the academics would be the historical facts that we can prove through some writings or something like that, or maybe we can in some way demonstrate something, right? The mythology then is something very different. I'll also argue that the mythology may well be more important than the facts. Myths are much more important than facts are. And myths tell greater truths than facts do. There's no question in my mind of that, and I can demonstrate that over and over again to you. But I'll also tell you there's only one story. You've read the stories over and over again, but you're only reading one story. There's only one. But we have so many variations on it. So
About the
if
hero's
you
journey?
look back, that's it. That's all there is. If you look at Moses and you look at Star Wars, the first Star Wars movie, that's the same story, man. There's a cat living on a desert planet who's raising droids. There's a cat living in a desert who's raising sheep. They both have some kind of an intervention from a mystical thing. They had their sidekick. One grabs Aaron, the other grabs the robots. They go on a mission to save the world from ultimate evil. One is Darth Vader, the other is the Pharaoh. They perform a series of miracles. They transform and they go back to where they started. It's the same damn story. That's the story of human nature, right? That's right out of Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung.
Yeah.
That's right from there. So let's talk first about the Rosicrucians. So the Rosicrucians, there was a Rosicrucian movement around the late 15th, early 16th century, at the same time that the Masonry is moving from what we call operative, it's guys who actually work in stone, to speculative, guys who don't. And we know why this transition takes place because in 1640, there's a guy named Isaac Asimov, and he has a diary, and he talks about being made a Mason. And he's made a Mason in a group of 5 men, and he calls one guy Colonel, one guy Esquire, another guy Esquire, and 2 guys have no titles. The 2 guys with no titles are Masons. The Colonel and the Esquires, those are gentlemen, right? So they're not stonemasons when they make him a Mason. So we can see there's this mixed lodge. We can then look at the Grand Lodge records of the early 18th century, 1715 to 1720, 1717, that area. And we see that the first Grand Master was an actual stonemason. This guy who worked in stone. There's a transition period. So the Rosicrucians as a movement are very active, and many of them are both Freemasons, members of the Royal Society, and also Rosicrucians. So there is some influence on that movement in early Freemasonry, and it shows up on our degrees. So yes, there's a connection, and it is both mythological and probably fact-based. Now the Templars, the problem with the Templars is there is all kinds of, there's no question that beginning in the early parts of the 18th century, men pick up themes from chivalry and the Templars, and they impress them upon Freemasonry, or they adopt those. But remember, that's the tree with the vines, right? That gets pulled out. There's less evidence to say somewhere between 1317 and the earliest documents of Freemasonry, let's call it 1450, that 120 year history. There's no historical bridge. No, I got a book right back here called The Temple and the Lodge. It's right there. And that's where these 2 fellows try to trace this back. They just can't get through that 100-year gap to show
there's no connection between like the Knights of Malta, the Knights of Christ, or where Templars just changed their names.
Well, they did. That's what they did. One group of Templars go to the north and become the Teutonic Knights because there's a whole bunch of heathens up there to fight in the Baltic states, and they have a great time to do their thing. Some become the Knights of Malta. Some go into Portugal. Some become Knights Hospitallers. Some just flee. Some just go, what the heck? I'm too old to be a knight anyway, and they retire.
I've been told they made it all the way to Central Canada and down into South America. I've talked to all the people. I actually even spoke to someone who said he did his family tree, and then and it led back to Templars.
Well, my family tree, and I can, again, take you back to the 11th century and being with Richard the Lionhearted in a crusade. So, not a
Was it your
Templar, I was
fault?
a Templar.
Was your ancestors' fault
No,
that you got taken?
no, he when he got knocked off his horse, my ancestor broke a lance on five Saracen and killed him. And if you
Oh,
look at
nice.
the family crest is a broken lance, and the motto is "Sic Fractus Fortis," which is "If you break us, we get stronger," which
All right.
turns out to be pretty true.
All
um,
right.
but what I'm saying is there's no Templar connection in that. He wasn't a Templar, and he was just a guy on a horse. So there's no historic. There is mythological connections between the Templars and modern Freemasonry, but no historical connections. And so we'd have to decide which of those is more important to us.
Okay. What symbols in the Templar lodges or outside do you want to talk about today? And sort of like what myths really resonate with you and uh, sort of speak to you, beyond the hero's journey.
Well, I think the easiest thing to do is to talk about some of the language and symbology which has found its way into the modern American lexicon, and it relates right back to masonry. And if it's leaked out and it's become a words that you say, and you don't even know you're saying it, then it's probably pretty powerful. And let's talk about the first one, maybe on the level. You'll hear people say, "Oh, he's on the level, right?" And he's on the level. And early in Freemasonry, the first lesson we'll teach a man is that means that we meet each other on the level. We meet and treat each other with equality within the lodge room, from the highest to the lowest. But if you think about it, the more powerful lesson to this Freemasonry, if you think about meeting a man on the level, and I work so hard to do this because it's so very hard to do. Every human being that you meet, if you think of them as just like you, they have the same divine spark that you do. They are no lower or higher in stature than you are. If you can remove the lower or higher part, just that, you remove filters that you filter information, you get better information from human beings. You get the information you might need. You're able to judge situations better. If I think of you as lower than me, I don't listen as well. If I think of you as higher than me, then I may add too much credence. I may filter what you tell me differently. So if you work to meet every human being, like I'd work in this interview to meet you on the level, right? We're just two guys talking in a room here. Neither of us is better than the other one. You know as much as I do. And what you need to know is important for me to know, because you know stuff I don't know. And the stuff you know may help me survive. If you can meet a man like that, every conversation you have, you become a much more effective negotiator, a much more effective spouse, a much more effective parent. There's so much more that you can do if you learn to meet human beings on the level. And so that's one part of the journey, that the level teaches us. There's another level to this, another level to the level. I was at the dentist chair and I just wrote an essay on this. My wife said it was one of the best essays that I wrote, because when I went to the dentist chair, I have a bridge here, and the bridge came out with a milk dud. I had to go to the dentist. Dentist gets in there and he goes, "Well, I can put that back." He goes, "But that tooth we've been talking about in the up, that one's coming out today." So I had to have dental surgery. And they took an x-ray, and they took this 360-degree
I hate
x-ray
those.
of me. And I sat there in the chair for an hour looking at my own skull. Okay. So in Freemasonry, we have a thing called the chamber of reflection. And in the chamber of reflection is a skull. But imagine sitting in a dentist chair looking at your own skull and thinking, that's what I'm going to look like in the very, very soon recent future. I mean, that's me. That's my mortality. Now, if you start to think about that and reflecting upon just what's important, what's really important about today, what's important that I do, that I say, what's not important, what am I wasting my time on? That's the level of time. And we quote Shakespeare in that, because we're all traveling on this level of time to a place that we're not going to return from. We're all going there. So that teaches us, again, that reinforces the fact that we ought to be treating each other as equals, but it also reinforces the fact that we should be helping each other. Remember, getting the information, but also then it helps us to prioritize and think what's important and what's not important, because this is a short short journey. So that's just the level, and there's more to it, and we can keep going with the level.
I have a question for you, and the best answer is probably, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. But it won't be because you study mythology. Um, is there anything within the code or scripture or whatever the rules of the Masonic order that is tied to the Anunnaki myth of Sumeria?
Well, that's hard to. You could tie anything back to things like that, right? And
Well, a belief that the Anunnaki are still here, and there are like bloodlines that control everything.
there's nothing in Freemasonry that teaches that. There's
Okay.
nothing in Freemasonry that teaches that, right? However, again, if you view that idea as mythology, but mythology that's teaching a powerful lesson, let's pick it apart as that. Not it's true that there's a bloodline but what if there are certain human traits that are passed on genetically that are so powerful that they end up being natural leaders? What if there are human traits that are passed on generationally, and things we can learn from that make it seem that way? That's probably true. I mean, anybody who's got grandchildren and they do something that you saw your grandfather do, you got 2 levels down and you can see 2 levels up, and you can see behaviors they couldn't possibly know they're mimicking. That's genetics. That's
Right, but it's also
powerful.
part of the
So maybe the
American myth is that America, we're the hardy people, we're the adventurers, and we can do everything just by virtue of us, being Americans. We've all been sort of granted that ancestor or descendants of demigods kind of thing.
Well, but if you look at the true mythology, though, what really happened? There's 2 things that make that somewhat true. The first is that we've got an ocean on either side, so we haven't been invaded in so long. We don't know what that's like. But number 2 is everybody who got here had to come from somewhere else, except even the indigenous people. There's no such thing as indigenous. They came from somewhere else, and it was a long journey to get here.
Yeah,
right. From wherever they came, and then people who migrated from east to west. How hardy would you have to be to pick everything up and follow a dream? And how long genetically would that play out in you? And I think a long time. And I think we are still beneficiaries of those who walked before us.
Well, we're doing a pretty good job with social media and video games of reversing our superior genetics in that regard. Okay. Does the pineal gland fit heavily within the I don't know the right words. I'm just saying the doctrines of Freemasonry?
Well, there's no doctrine of Freemasonry talk specifically about that. However, I think there's probably something to that. If you talk to anybody who's had a mystical experience,
and I have,
what they'll tell what they'll tell you that it's so random, right? And this is just my personal belief. Now, I think that there are all kinds of cosmic rays shooting through us, neutrinos and things we don't even know about. And every once in a while, one bounces just right. I think we're giant antennas. We're giant receivers. And one hits the pineal gland. Maybe that's the place just right. And the next thing you know, you're in a seemingly DMT-influenced mystical experience. One of the things we do see in Freemasonry, every Mason I know that's a master Mason, master of a lodge, and there's 2 different, that means 2 different things, but the master of a lodge will tell you, and they don't know that they're talking about it, but when they're delivering the lectures and the ritual, they'll induce a flow state or a semi-transcendental state. In other words, they'll feel like they're talking out of themselves. They're talking besides themselves, an out-of-body experience, because the information is so inculcated in you as it's coming out. Your conscious mind can detach, your ego can detach, and you get a view of what you would look like if you didn't have the ego in the way. You get that flow state, that transcendental state, and generally it ends when a guy goes, "Well, that's really cool," and it kind of snaps everything back into line.
I like how you're hitting the mic like a gong.
Well, I meant to snap my fingers.
Right. I wonder, as a retired officer, if you're not giving like all these perps excuse, so when they're on the stand, It wasn't me, man. A cosmic ray, a neutrino hit my pineal gland, and I went into an out-of-body experience. I was temporarily incapacitated, man.
I don't think that would work, but there, feel free to try.
Yeah. Go ahead, defense attorneys.
That's just that's my opinion on that. I mean, I don't know. I know that these things happen, and they happen to people who are reasonable human beings. The pineal gland, I believe, is our bodies regenerate every cell every 7 years, except that one. That one is the ancient cells within us. That's my understanding of it medically, and I could be wrong about that.
Well, I'm not going to be the one to correct you because I have no idea. All right. So I could continue to ask you about symbols that are in the lodge and symbols you want to talk about, but I have to believe there's some overlap between the books that you're actually here to talk about and some of that stuff. So let's get into. I mean, I don't know if you just want to talk about the temple within, or if you want to talk at all about the other 8, or sort of the journey that led you to the 9th level.
Well, the 8th and 9th book are interesting because they work together, and they work together a very, very strange way. I wanted to learn to write fiction. I'm just now beginning to get pretty good at it. I'm a good technical writer, but I want to write fiction, so I was trying to figure out a way to do that. At the same time, I always had wanted to do different jobs, right? I retired from the police department something like 22 years ago, so I've been a teacher since at a university, I've written consulting. So I got this idea. I always wanted to be like a trash truck driver. I wanted to be a movie usher. I wanted to be a cab driver. And I thought, it was brand new in, I think in 2016, 2017, this thing called Uber, and they were looking for drivers. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do that, see what it's like, and see if there's a story in that. And well, after the first ride, I end up going, you know what? I'm going to collect these stories. I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to teach myself to set scenes, write dialogue through these experiences. And I end up writing Chasing the Surge, 10,000 Rides into the American Night. I did 10,000 Uber rides. It terminates with the pandemic, but I do it for about 4 years. And what's interesting about that is I immediately, during the pandemic, sit down and I put pen to paper. And I end up with 100,000 words of garbage. It's awful. It's an awful book. It's just terrible. And it's unreadable. So I rework it because it's the work of a writer, is reworking. And I get it down to 70,000 words, maybe 75. And it's just awful. So I set it aside and I go, this is awful, man. I don't know what's wrong with this thing. Well, then I kick in high gear in writing the Temple Within. I finish the Temple Within. And I don't know the title for it. I can't figure it out. So I look over and I get this other manuscript, and it dawns on me what's wrong with Chasing the Surge. I get it. I finally get it. What's wrong with the Chasing the Surge is that the story is me. I'm the one who's changing. I'm taking the hero's journey in an Uber. I'm the one transforming based on all the crazy shit that's happening in the car. When you're a police officer, you go to there's a problem. You go to everybody's in crisis, right? That's the whole job's crisis. You go to a place, people are having some crisis. You come up with a solution, and then you implement that solution. And if they don't like that solution, you know what you do? You make them do it. That's what the police do. When you're an Uber driver, you can see the solution, but you can't make anybody do shit, right? That's just the way it is. You have to learn a whole new level of skill. So I go, oh my. So I rewrite that book. In the 6 months I'm rewriting that book, it's about me. And then I go, oh, this book, The Temple Within, this is about me too. This is about inside, building the temple within. And so they both come out. One comes out in August, one comes out in September, because they're right behind each other. They were clogged in my conscience. I'm currently writing and publishing on my blog stories from when I was a police officer. And I got a comment from my great aunt, and she goes, oh, I felt like I was right there with you. The same comment I got from a couple of other people, because I finally learned to write a dialogue and to set scenes. And so that was a real important journey for me as a writer, to learn to do those things. I'm still working on that because I want to write fiction and not necessarily technical work. So those two books, Chasing the Surge, 10,000 Rides in the American Night, and The Temple Within, are my latest books. Police Technology, which is the one right above right there, right in the back there. That is my first book I ever wrote. That's a textbook that was published by Prentice Hall. that came out about 20 years ago. And is used in colleges and universities. It must be still being used because every 6 months I get a little royalty check. So I don't know. People are still buying the damn thing.
Maybe by CSI.
That book's so old. I talk about floppy disks in that book, and there was no CSI at that time.
There are stories where, because we're so technologically dependent, that criminals use such old technology that we're no longer capable of translating or figuring out what's going on, because we're so used to tracking iPhones and things like that. And earlier you joked about Morse code, and using Morse code, it's basically impenetrable now because nobody goes through the Boy Scouts.
Well, I think that there is some wisdom in that, and one of the things that I do very well is I talk about being able to bridge the analog and the digital worlds. And I wonder, because we analog, right, and then digital, but I wonder what's next, what the quantum world will look like for our children and grandchildren. Certainly our grandchildren are going to see a world that is much different technology-wise than the ones that we see today, if it keeps going as it is. Very good questions.
Are you worried at all about the quantum world with unfettered capitalism? Basically, the whole world becomes sort of like Argentina, or like every dystopian, book where, the 1% are basically living on Mount Olympus, alone with, private military contractors, or maybe it's not private any longer. And the rest of us slobs are living here, basically in Mad Max Fury World, or, in Brave New World, where, the United States was, entirely just like a amusement park, wasteland. Peter Thiel fleeing to Argentina, Elon Musk having 12 kids from 12 different mothers. Talk about symbolism there. You creating your own biblical tribes while seeking immortality. I mean, a psychologist would have a field day with that, except they'd be wrapped up in NDAs. The NDAs would be like the strongest igloo ever built. But I don't know. Do you know where I'm going with this? I mean, I don't know where to put the question mark, but I feel like I don't need to say more for you to pick up the thread.
Okay, so as you get older, you have to be very careful about judging the current society based on values that probably did not exist, but they're in your memory. I will tell you that in the 1970s, when I was growing up, the world was on fire with the Vietnam War and the protests. We actually killed our own American citizens. The National Guard was shooting people on college campus at Kent State and killed several of them. I mean, there were things going on that were we thought the world was ending. That's when the book, The Late Great Planet Earth, came out. That was the overpopulation scare that we thought. Turns out that was completely bogus. So there was lots of things to say in the 70s. It was the end times. Now here we are, man. It's 50 years later, and we haven't gone anywhere. I see my grandchildren. I have conversations with them, and I'm like, man, the Artemis 2, the thrusters, 7 of them were put together by one of my grandsons. And I mean, wow. That kid, the space stuff's going on with him. The other one is, they're all just brilliant young people. So I meet young people who are doing very, very well, and I have a lot of hope for. I do worry that we spend too much time in front of these screens. I worry that we're becoming a screen society and we're delegating a lot to the screens. I see where AI is a great tool, but I worry about how much we're going to delegate to it. And it is a serious question of whether or not I think the machines are completely capable of saying we're the pestilence and getting rid of us. I think that that's possible. So there are lots of open questions as we move into the middle of the 21st century. But I got to say, it sounds really exciting. I mean, it sounds really exciting.
So you are an optimist transhumanist.
Sure. I mean, I've been long enough to see where it generally works out okay.
Yeah. I mean, you had a point in there that the end is always nigh. The end has always been nigh. The end, or are we, there was Y2K, there was 2012, now there's the Great Reset. I mean, it's sort of like the same old song.
Well, I read the
I'm
other
not
day
really
that
worried about the end of
one,
times. I'm worried about like, sort of like a first world French Revolution type of, thing with, which, just
but I'm the duck and cover generation. We worried about being incinerated. So I mean, what's going to happen? I read an article where there's a school of thought now that between 1,000 and 1,300 doesn't exist because it was just made up by a couple of monks to get us through some of the, that's possible. There's a bunch of history missing, right? Who knows what the end has always been near, and the current generation is never as good as the previous generation, and that's all malarkey.
Well,
right?
I mean, there's more than a few holes in that missing 300s, and that is that European history wasn't written, but the rest of the world wrote down their history and built things that were dated and things like that. Yeah, it was a timing. It was like a calendrical correction by, I think, like 2 popes and a Holy Roman Emperor or something to get there. But
that's something going on.
Yeah, but that is definitely a fun one, and it sort of starts with I think around like what was considered like the worst year in history, like 576, when like when the sun disappeared for a year, because of volcanic eruptions or it had to be volcanic eruptions, unless it was UFOs after all. I mean, you don't have any secrets there about disclosure and stuff that you can reveal now that you're doing the podcast circuit.
No, I don't have anything to deal with. I think that I'll give you my opinion. I don't think that I think they're interdimensional more than I think they are distance in this dimension. I think the science of it says that. That's my interpretation as a very, very lay person, is that it seems to me the math of it coming from one dimension to another is possible, whereas coming from billions of miles away, probably not.
I guess I find the concept of dimensions more difficult than cryogenetics, and it was just a particle, and it was just for a very short period of time. But here on Earth, scientists discovered a particle or created a particle that, for a very, very brief millisecond or whatnot, moved faster than the speed of light. So Einstein is either very happy or very upset somewhere. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm sure he'd be excited, just like you. He's probably excited about science and developments in the future. But yeah, quantum. Actually, you should talk to my friend PJ. He's out there on the West Coast with you. He would love to talk about it. And he too is a Freemason. And so maybe you're even in one of the same Blue Lodges. In fact, I've heard the term Blue Lodge before, and it was in the context of one of the conversations with him and some of his friends. So who knows? Maybe because while Justin Gabriel was his WWE name, PJ Black is not his real name either. His shoot name is so far below, it shall not be revealed by me anyway. In any event, is there anything else that you want to tell us about the books, or is there some symbol that you really want to talk about that we didn't get to talk about, like dragons, like sea serpents, representing chaos, giants the cows lick that lead to milk? Anything like that?
I do think that it's interesting. I think that chaos is a really important concept in Freemasonry. We don't have the equivalent of the dragons. We have the checkerboard square, the light and dark colors. And one of the things I talk about is the darkness and the light and the chaos. It's important to know about those. You can't go through life without stepping on both. You're going to encounter both chaos and light in your life. And also, the stronger, more rooted you are in your value system in the light, the better you are to withstand the chaos. But lastly, I think the most important lesson on chaos is that all creativity generally flows out of chaos. You've got to go into the chaotic and the unknown to be truly creative and truly innovative. And so, when the lights are on and it's all happy talk, it's a party. But, when there's a problem, that's when the strong use their value systems and their character to work their way through the darkness and the chaotic scene. And so that's one of the lessons we teach with the checkerboard square, among other lessons, because it's a tressellated. It's surrounded by a border. It's got the blazing star. It's got the Cirrus dog star in it, and that kind of freaks guys out because, well, we're back to ancient Egypt again, aren't we?
Or older.
Maybe. Yeah, I think, and I've always thought this. I'm like, man, I look at the Sphinx and I go, sure looks like water erosion to me, but what do I know, right? And the fact that it lines up to a time that it would line up with the stars to a time that's 13,000 years ago, that makes a lot of sense to me, quite frankly. I do think that there are human civilizations that we don't know about. We've been around a long, long time, and we have remembered and forgotten many, many times as human beings.
Oh, yeah. It wouldn't shock me. I just don't adhere to the Graham Hancock that there was some super advanced Atlantis culture,
doesn't have to be super advanced Atlantis. There's a great science fiction story called A Canticle for Leibowitz. And it's a whole society that's formed around a religious society formed around a precious document they have from the previous generations. And what's revealed in the end is it's a deli menu. And so that's what they found. And they built a whole society around A Canticle for Leibowitz. And so I often think that there's just things we don't know, brother. That's all there is to it.
The Holy Kanish has spoken. All hail the corned beef.
That's right.
I have to tell you something. This is a confession that I've made before, but it's so bad that I need to confess it more than once. I don't really understand what corned beef and pastrami are. I just don't know. I just don't know what they are.
They're good. Yeah, I love pastrami.
That much I know. And you know what? At the end of the day, maybe that's the only thing I need to know. All right.
Well, actually, all you need to know is they are chemically preserved. That's all.
Yeah, but I think the chemical's salt, isn't it? Isn't it just like salt water?
Well, it's salt and spices, yeah.
Yeah. So it's natural preservations. It's it's extremely healthy. Everybody eat it. But turkey pastrami is an abomination. So
that's right. No,
exactly. So that's good. So that's probably a good place to end on that solid agreement. The turkey pastrami is an abomination. Perhaps Jedi Kevin, that should be the title to the show. I don't know. But probably The Temple Within makes more sense. Mr. Foster, if people want to find and follow you, or if they want to buy your books, or if they want to do both, how might they do so?
HiTechCJ.com, HiTechCJ.com. That was my consulting website. It's morphed into an author website. You can find all my social media. You can find a phone number, an email, a P.O. box, my blogs, books. And if you want to find out my current writings where I'm experimenting around with stories about policing, I just wrote one called The Dangerous Cat.
Oh,
yeah, that's a good story.
Cats can be dangerous. I've got the scars on my legs to prove
it. There you go.
All right. So, folks, if you want to find me, you can follow me on the X at dose_evil or at IcarusFellMD, depending on which account you want to follow. Maybe both. You can find me sometimes here on the Sports Jedi Network. Garden of Thought is also on all major podcast platforms. That's also found on the Wrestling Soup Network, believe it or not. I'm here Mondays at 6:05 with my best friend, Mr. Thomas, and we do the MLW files. Mr. Thomas, as you may know, recently with MLW, so we got some inside dope. I also do the LFG review show on Wrestling Soup with the legendary Lufisto and some other things here and there. So that's where you can find and follow me. Hope that you do. Hope that you enjoyed the show. Mr. Forster, hope you enjoyed your time on the show and we got to everything that you wanted to get to. Folks, I think that's a wrap.